Man thought the eldritch was unknowable. They never thought that it could think the same of them, or that peering into the abyss went both ways. Naish was foul blood. In his veins ran the power of the ancients and the above, far out of the reach of man. Out of reach, until now. All it had taken was him as a catalyst to finish the ritual. Years of research, of wondering and hoping. A drought with no known source was a powerful motivator on top of it. No longer will the waters run ever drier. Come to us, Rogathar. Come to us, and finally reveal your grandeur. Naish thought, a smile on his lips as he walked up the steps, to the central altar of the Sathanat. In a place where once forbidden gods are studied, where the knowledge of the divine and man meet, we will save this empire. It would not just be for the Emperor's command either. No, this would be a wondrous day for the feet alone. Blackened water ran down the walls in rivulets from a great chandelier above. The chandelier was designed to appear as an intricate puzzle resembling a maze of coral, its fluids collected from those strange, dark streams where the watermen gathered. The hall it loomed over was circular, an indoor amphitheater that acted as an extra library when it was not being used for grand events such as this. Currently, the gallery seats were being filled by the Emperor's soldiers, the Emperor himself seated in the highest chair where the head among heads of the Sathanat would typically sit. Close enough in this case. The Emperor had funded ventures like this across all his lands. Every duke, every duchy had received grants as the Imperium's snaking rivers continued to quietly dry up. It was only a threat to the smaller territories. But Emperor Harlan Audley was not a man who would allow waste to his people to go unchecked in any manner. Go on then, master scholars. Perform this deed, and I will grant the promised funds and more. The Emperor's voice came from a handsome, scarred visage, dressed in dark blues and golds. They were not the Empire's colors, but that of the Sathanati. It was his way of showing how much respect and weight rested on this matter. Naish smiled. They had performed a minor calling before this, so granting results would be paltry. They merely had to hope Rogathar's interest remained. Remember, only I speak to the old beast. His fellow scholars nodded, tentative optimism in their faces and postures, as much as fear, sweat, and tension. They performed the ritual. They gave the offerings, spoke the waterman tongues, and prostrated themselves. They called upon the materials and knowledge gathered, easing their way into a realm that was not their own. The Sathanat had learned early on you only wanted to enter the between, not fully cross over. They had lost 3 of their kind to the waters of the beyond that way, and had only done it again to collect what they'd needed for their tasks. The mortal world gave way to the world of gods. An expansive sea now lay beyond them at the edge of their vision, water filling out the far ends of the amphitheater without wetting a single person or tile. The onlookers, almost exclusively composed of the Emperor's most elite guard, moved away from it regardless. The smell of something stranger than sea salt filled the air, choking and cloying. Naish and his scholars covered their faces with masks to breathe. The Emperor took one eagerly when it was offered to him, and they were passed to his men. Naish looked about. He wore his mask for the ceremony. The others like him. Those few the Emperor had brought for superstitious good luck clearly breathed easier than the others beneath their masks. Something's coming, master. One of Naish's pupils gently prodded his attention towards the sea line. Past the dark beach, sand underfoot crunching in a way that was not natural and littered with stones too smooth or too jagged, something was gliding through the water towards them. Rogathar had not shown them its true form, no more than glimpses. Whether this was for their own well-being or to maintain mystery, they would soon discover. Show yourself to us, please, and heed our prayers. We ask little. Everyone in the room trembled, with anticipation under a ceiling lit by a chandelier bleeding otherworldly fluids, which threatened at the moment to merge with a sky in colors none had ever seen displayed above them, framed in the mortal world's clouds. The figure that glided through the water, parting it as easily as any mortal sea beast would with the right form, did not increase in size as it came towards them. Naic raised his brows slightly, but maintained his dignity. A shell came out, of the water, like a clam with an unusually soft casing, which rose on a long neck of black seaweed running through with off-color pearls. It opened to reveal something nobody had quite expected. A mere babe. Someone could not help themselves from blaspheming. No one cared to check who, as awe was still in effect over the whole of the room. It was small, round, with a minuscule tail. It looked itself like a pearl, if it was the right color, threaded with black spots, and had been intentionally softened. It had more eyes than any regular creature would, which served as a reminder of its alien nature. It was almost endearing. Yet Naic knew what he was dealing with, and so he steeled himself against such foolish notions of instinctual affection. He got onto his knee, bowed his head. Everyone else did so in tandem, including the seated audience who were close enough to feel imposed upon. Naic spoke in the relevant old tongue. He chided himself. Years spent in pursuit of this, and I still have only a child's talent for it. The old words were not easy to make for mortal men, and despite all the rumors and gossip, Naic's breed of foul blood were not perfect practitioners of dark arts. Besides, their lips were only half a fish's. It was still hard to make the sounds. It was pigeon at best. "Dearest Rogathar, you come?" he'd call, he said. The small creature turned its form towards him, rolling in its strange clam-like shell. It was indeed like watching a pearl move. Somehow it was unnerving. Rogathar spoke, in a voice that had always been gentle and melodic, yet now made more sense with its visage, at least partially, revealed. "Friends, they come to me truly. Almost." It had been almost unintelligible at first encounter, its whims alien, its words indecipherable. But as they had spoken with it over the years, it had shown its intelligence and wisdom. It had begun to mimic their words, their turns of phrase. They still spoke to it in its own tongue out of a desire for respect. It seemed to either appreciate it or be placated by it. So they had never fully stopped, even as it had demanded their own languages be offered to it in conversation. Yes, come. Naic hesitated briefly. He thought of the dying villages and towns. His hesitation went away. "Power, over water. You have this." He spoke inquisitively without making demands. He had no desire to potentially offend the creature, for multiple reasons. Much, yes. "You want water?" It was hard to read the creature's tone. It was like trying to parse the verbal intent of a chime. "We have come prepare offerings. We'll give, we ask, grace held, to, will you play a game?" Naic paused, how to place his words. "If it possible." Rogathar paused, themselves. A lengthy, ominous silence. It was long enough for Naic to risk a glance towards the Emperor, who was frowning tersely. Eventually, the creature moved slightly, a shift that caused its flesh to wobble in place and injected an image directly into Naic's mind. Instead of long-lost knowledge, punishments, or anything else as grand as he would have expected, however, he experienced a moment's reeling and outcry as he processed an image of a board game he'd played but a few hours ago to prime his mind for any tests of intellect he may have had to endure. Rogathar had proven fond of such things, even when significant gaps were found in the Sathinaat's comprehension of things and Rogathar's. He could not help but blink offensively. To play? This? It nodded, a human gesture it had learned. So they played. They played for several hours, long enough for even the most tense in the room to grow bored or start finding excuses to wander off. The Emperor never left, his eyes transfixed on this most important and strange machination, though his confusion was plain on his face and ever growing. Naic's entourage retreated to the audience benches. He won 15 out of over 20 games played. Rogathar won 5, though 2 victories had been granted to it intentionally. The second time it figured out Naic's angle, and that was the only time it warbled in a high pitch to show genuine offense. When Naic thought about it, it was the only time, in his memory, until that point it had ever shown actual upset in response to something the Sathinaat members had done. When all was over, the creature tilted its head, or at least angled, its body questioningly at Nayich. "You have not asked your boon." It spoke to him in imperial trade speech now, which caused him to jolt in place from surprise. He considered. At some point, he had relaxed in full, enthralled in the game and the absurdity of the experience. Somehow, at some point, he had relaxed enough to find asking it in his own tongue a plain task. "Our water suffers. If it is not helped, we will starve of it. We hoped you would be willing to aid us." Rogathar's mouth opened, showing black needled teeth and a tongue that was not made of flesh. "Anything for a friend?" They had sat cups around the room waiting for fresh water, so they would know when the deed was done. Rogathar did not ask about them, seeming to glean their intent itself. It had played one game now that Nayich thought about it, for each cup, each one filled with pure water, clear as daylight, as Rogathar slowly turned about the room. It had slipped Nayich's mind towards the end that they were even between dimensions. It was disarming me of my senses. Then, the thought quickly died on the vine in favor of one that was almost too simple. No, it was enjoying my company. It was such a strange thought. Nayich remembered first seeing the shining gleam of the black tar water, hearing the whispers of the other foul bloods of his ilk, traveling out towards the Sathanat to find answers to his origin. His people had not stopped being loathed. Yet, as more knowledge was unveiled by the year, he had eventually found a place, respect here. Something stirred inside him. It was not a desire for grand answers or even clean water. If he must, he could drink the oily fluid as if it was from the freshest of streams. He had done this task for others. A human thing. Yet now, he found himself wanting to include this strange creature in his definition of human things. It was obviously not, but it was learning from them. Through that strange veil of man and eldritch, it had learned from them. What else? "Have you to teach me, you gentle thing? Perhaps even a mere child?" It was blasphemous in both regard for the otherworldly and the scholarly, but he laughed full and heartily. Everyone balked at him, tensed, but when Rogathar gave its own raspy, drowning-sounding laugh, they relaxed. They drew up maps for it, taught it. They brought it into their realm eventually, and the Emperor was pleased to find the drying waters of those smaller frontier territories running so bountiful of a sudden that every settlement along the once dying rivers and lakes flourished. The Emperor could have asked for more, but he had seen two things that day, something unexpectedly gentle, and a world he had not wanted to wander further into. He expressed as much when asked about the experience. He did not want anything else, especially not from a power he did not yet understand. Nayich sat at a table at the top of the Sathanat. It has grown in the last 2 decades. The tallest tower had come to be his own, a place of learning turned into a multifaceted institution of deep learning, God-seeking, and power of all kinds. He had grown weary, having to play 2 games at once at all hours of every day. One, the game of men always clamoring for more, despite their greatest leader shying away from the abundance they sought. Second, the game of Hatinas, an old board game from the coasts, brought by a pirate long ago, now practiced by everyone of both the law and lawless empire-wide. Rogathar had never stopped loving it. "You've never come to regret your choices, have you, Rogathar?" Nayich asked, sitting across from something that had become humanoid, yet not quite so. A mass of tentacles, soft black and white flesh, and dark needle teeth. Its tongue was so long and sturdy it had, multiple times, played the game with it as if it was its hand. It had stopped once it had noticed it caused the pieces to become coated in slime that ate away at their white wood shells. Rogathar, despite originally bearing a masculine name, had turned out to be a she-creature. Whatever that truly meant for her kind. So many answers in so much time, yet so little is known still. They had grown indeed a child in the end. They had borne their own children eventually, after reaching their equivalent of adulthood. They had brought parts of their world into mankind's. The Sathanat had become recognized as the Sathanal in plural, a properly regarded scholarly group that had begun to spread across even nations that previously disrespected or hunted it. Not all of them. Rogathar said, voice more orderly these days, yet still carrying that sea melody tone. What of you? Naic paused, mid-raising a knight into the air. He examined the board state. He pondered. I regret letting myself seek, more than I wanted even so. His scales were far thicker. His neck no longer has even a semblance of straightness. His robes do not quite fit, yet he had refused to wear the new ones they had made for him. Every little thing to keep his old self intact was a necessity. So, few others had been able to. He needed to have something of himself at hand. His two keen ears heard a sound. Rogathar's strange mouth turned downward. I must tend to it. To what again? He looked out the window, at the stretch of the town that had built up and died around him. They had left the lurking beasts in the streets. All you needed to do was give anyone they wanted to pass inside the right scent mark. A town could thrive, even in watery shadows. Fitting. He could no longer, after all, stop seeing that other world overlaying the one he had first called home. He had no idea which he belonged to. But as he looked outside, saw the Emperor's finest scattered across, the Sathanaut's once well-manicured lawn in death pose, he remembered that it did not matter. I'll protect you for as long as they keep coming. He stood up. He had started to grow older. He was not quite ancient by the standards of man yet, but he still felt the weight of years on him in every movement. Perhaps he had been a foul-blood and no more than that for a reason. Please, I just want to finish the game. Rogathar knew how to tend a pleading voice now. Before, it had worked, especially when they were still small, and when they were experiencing their most important growing pains. It did not suffice now, not in this matter. Naic stared out at the blackened, oily river that had once been so pure and clean, still, winding its way through the township and beyond even now. It still caught the sunlight, but everyone who drank from it now perished, withered, or became something else. All it took was the desperation to drink from it, when you found nothing else that could slake your thirst for miles. He had never had such troubles. He had scrawled black ink over many of the Emperor's maps. His decree still hung on the grand doors to the amphitheater. With all respect for your institution's contributions, in the name of the Emperor, Avril Audley, we ask that you surrender your otherworlder weapons and yourselves to the Empire's grace. For its stability, its health, and its love, the beast must be returned. It could not be. Its kin no longer understood what it was, and it did not want to go home. Had not wanted to, at least, before the rivers had stopped running clear water. The Emperor's men had wanted to slay it. All it had taken to stop them from doing so was to peer too far, to wander beyond that beach and into the water. The streets of the town the Imperial Sathanal called its capital was now littered with offerings, monuments, and bowing supplicants. Rogathar did not desire any of it. The supplicants she would take, however. All she would ask is they stop bowing to her. Yet they no longer knew how to stop doing so. Past a throng of serpentine, pale things in hoods below in the great waterlogged garden, down the length of the longest mainway street, a knight was approaching. They slew their foes surely, and in whose name they came Naic did not know. They had made special hunters for those such as him, who no longer obeyed the whims of man. Naic threw out his arms. As long as you are gentle, as long as you are kind and more human than we could ever expect, I will not abandon you. He thought the words, not saying them, as he knew Rogathar would recoil at them. Perhaps, someday, he would see his own children, again, and they would be playing with Rogathar's, now in a healthier garden. They had had to send them away. He could no longer remember how long ago it was, in which of those 20 years it had happened. Even the names of the town below. The river's old self and his very family escaped him. He would survive, and eventually, he would find them. The things of Avini can endure far longer than man ever could hope, and he now walked in both that world and his own. Enjoy next story. Why do you think the universe is so big? Because it's full of stuff. That's an annoying answer. True, though. Hens climbed to the top of the hill with Clyde. He was less than half Clyde's age, but the older man seemed to do just fine working his way through the colony world's esoteric environment. Hens moved slowly, carefully, stepping around plants, with tendrils that gently grasped at his boots. Clyde simply went, keeping his attention on the things ahead of him instead of what was at his feet, not seeming to acknowledge the purple-blue shapes scuttling on the ground. The greater landscape came into view once they brushed past the final stand of pillars. They were tall, white as bone, and strangely soft, bending out of the way when pressed into before rehardening to solidity like they'd never changed. Beyond their close-knit thickets at the end of the winding gray azure path that ran up the tall hillside, the horizon revealed a whole lot of bizarre emptiness. Sand that faintly vibrated, blanketing the planet's surface for as far as Hen's and Clyde's vision went. Distant spines of mountains that were too cubal to be said to conform to anything but their own logic. Gray, blue, silver. Spheres of some kind floated about in vaguely cloistered groups, atop or far above dunes, in the flat spires of the mountains, and at the base of the quarter-mile-high hill. It was a gray world, through and through, half dead as can be, the only thing left from its past, whether it had been lush or just as dreary, being some choice oddities and deformities. "It's beautiful," Clyde said, voice filled with that easy sort of awe that always followed his sense of wonder. Hens had no idea why Clyde wanted to die here. They'd seen plenty of paradise worlds flourishing with beauty. He could have picked any one of them, lying down peacefully in a sea of vibrant colors, thriving ecosystems, and serene ambience. Hell, there were even less well-off worlds that were much prettier, in multitudes. Yet he'd wanted this one. "We've seen a lot, haven't we, old man?" Hens sat down, put his pack on the ground at his side. Their vehicle was still at the foot of the hill, but they'd come up wearing the appropriate habsuits and carrying just enough stuff to get by until Clyde's timer went to 0. A couple centuries in the stars, and the only thing mankind had ever figured out for fighting the flow of time was keeping yourself in it a little longer. Somehow it never felt like it was enough. "Course we have. Me more than you, but you'll get there." Clyde sat down a little rougher. He was old and worn out, but technically not supposed to die yet. The problem with the universe is it's just as full of danger as it is life, and he'd caught something psionic, in the brain, on one of those energy-charged worlds everyone climbed over each other to get at. Terminal ego degradation. Clyde had chosen to die earlier rather than break down inevitably. They'd gotten a little lost on that one expedition, long enough that nobody could completely help him by the time they got to him. Hens remembered trailing after him slowly, putting 2 and 2 together that something was wrong. Clyde had jumped like something had bit him, then his navigational know-how fell into a haze. Hours of watching him fumble until Clyde had been scared at first, then he'd just mellowed out somehow. Hens had thought he'd snapped at first, but you're really just okay with it. You could have had, 20, 40 more years? Not that I mean to. Hens turned away, squinted up at the local star and its pale, icy hue. This world wasn't human safe, not without the habitats and the suits. Hell, not for a decent few species. Awful, awful place to lie down for the last time. "It's okay. I know, but I saw enough. I'm content. I'm just glad I decided to leave my bubble early on so I could say that confidently." Clyde pulled up his wristwatch that was mounted on his suit. Technically, they can tell you the when, now, depending on the circumstance. Most people don't want to know. Sometimes it's not quite accurate anyway. "What about the other trips? What about your family? What about me?" Hens didn't mean to sound so snippy, but seeing Clyde, this whole time, just nodding along at his own fate without trying to do much about it irked him. What if I'd figured it out just a little earlier, called for help before... Bit of a bite in your tone, talking to a man about to die, Clyde said, voice smooth despite his age. He was just watching the environment, spheres floating up and down, humming with content. Far in the distance lay a handful of dome-shaped hab colonies, mainly science and mining settlements, along with training centers for people with certain kinds of abilities. A wildlife study, too. Hens looked down at something moving in the distance, down in the desert. It was metallic down there. He'd seen a video of a storm that happens on this world, something lightning-like arcing down, sending the ground grainy and floating like someone was playing with one of those ancient children's toys with the magnetic sand. Shards would follow, after, columns of twirling, jagged objects, some of it turning white somehow. When it was all over, they'd fall back to the surface, turning into the pillars they'd brushed through coming up here. One such storm was starting up right now. Kind of nice, isn't it? Life finds a way to impress. Even the stuff that isn't, all that alive. Clyde had his gaze fully locked on the swirls of gray-blue grain that were floating out of the dunes into parallel spirals. They twisted, turning like strange serpents as thunder boomed somewhere above. Zigzagging arcs of purple-white boomed in and vanished as fast as you could snap your finger, turning dull colors into sharp eggshell textures. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't want to see this stuff without you. I thought we could have gone somewhere. Hens couldn't keep all the emotion out of his voice, no matter how hard he tried. Nicer? It's all part of the big black, isn't it? Look, Clyde pointed. Reluctantly, Hens followed his gaze. There was a herd of fat, ugly, pale things with silver spines coming out of the ground, shaking off sand and moving towards one of the swirling columns. It stepped from side to side on legs that seemed too thin to carry it, then let itself be picked up after its spines began to resonate. Up it went, helpless, but oddly without struggle. The rest followed after it. They made some sort of high pitch, noise that sounded a bit like if someone ran old Morse code through a ringing wine glass. Isn't that going to... Just watch. Hens did. He saw the creatures get tossed like softballs after they slowly, placidly rotated around the sky, reaching swirls of alien sand all the way to the distant clouds far above. Hens flinched, picturing one splattering into the side of one of those mountains. Instead, they all started gliding their way towards a cluster of those spheres. They attached to it one by one, like magnets to a fridge before they began crawling all over it. Huh. Hens's wince turned into a contemplative frown and raised eyebrows. Clyde said nothing. He just smiled, humming a familiar tune he always sang wordlessly whenever he thought he was at the peak of a journey. It was off-key now, tainted by a foggy memory that had every right to still be clear as day. It did not seem to bother Clyde, if he even noticed. The alien life forms found whatever it was they needed to, began pressing all about at things only they could see across the surface of their designated sphere. Hens couldn't hear anything from this distance, so he filled in the sounds with his mind. Beeps, boops, clicks. The sphere let out one sound of its own, a resonating hum, before the things operating it responded with their awkward cries, and it began to open. Well, son of a... Hens watched as dozens of the silver-spined, white, blobby entities poured out like a nest of insects with all its eggs hatching at once. The presumably adults of the bunch who'd opened the structure carried the sphere's unfolding pieces down with them to the ground, resuming that glide they'd done with no visible wings or flaps. When they finally alighted close to the metallic, sand desert's floor, they dropped less ceremoniously and pulled the pieces underground. A new dune appeared over top of where they'd dug. Hens wasn't sure why, but it happened, and he felt like that last one, when it turned towards him and Clyde was looking at him specifically. What just happened? Hens forgot why they were there for a moment, looking over at Clyde. No idea. I think it was life going on, as the saying goes. Is that what you came here to see? Before you... Hens spoke slowly. Not because he was worried of saying the wrong thing. Something in his gut twisted, made him afraid of the answer. When you tell me, those'll be your last words. Then you'll... Clyde didn't answer right away. Instead, he finished watching the storm, all the way up until the last shards of white landed back onto the landscape and began to soften and tie themselves into shapes. Hens thought he saw some of those skittering purple-blue things they'd seen coming up the hill, running up to and melting into the new thickets. It was next on the list. Clyde replied finally, as if it was the only answer that made sense. Maybe it was. The bucket list. The one we were filling out together. Yeah. Clyde glanced at Hens, turned towards the desert, then paused. He turned towards Hens in full, grunting with the movement, and crossed his legs. He checked the watch, made a face, then dismissed some thought of his with a head shake and grinned. I wanted to ask you a favor, too. A favor? Your will? I wrote that up already. Clyde waved a hand dismissively over his shoulder. I want you to finish it off for me. There's a lot still on there. Are you serious? Hens blinked at him. His shoulders trembled. He wasn't sure if he was irritated or something a lot harder to push back down. Well, someone has to get it done, and it won't be me. Clyde turned back towards the desert, the distant colonies, and the world he would soon be leaving behind. I've only got till the sunset. Well, the local equivalent at least. Travel takes time I don't got. You could have had more, you didn't need to. Hens's voice cracked. Opt for pulling the plug? Clyde let some upset into his voice. It echoed slightly. Something was disturbed behind them. The hard tone turned into a metallic ding bouncing off something in the distance. Clyde sighed. Listen, I know how it looks. You're probably thinking, I'm taking this way too easy. Hens remembered Clyde's face when he first got the news, before he'd made his peace. I know you're not, and I know I shouldn't have pretended otherwise. It's okay. I'll say it. I'm scared. I don't know what comes after. I know my mind or spirit or whatever is going to go somewhere. But what's that going to feel like? Is that even real? Or is it like... Clyde shook his head, sighed. Again. It morphed into a deep breath, a single closing and opening of his eyes. Hens pulled out an ego capsule. They were both Parmelan, so they followed the Parmelan traditions. The closest humanity had ever gotten to truly averting death was putting what was left of you in a place you could trust a little more to figure it out. Hens looked up at the sky. It was colored a pale amethyst so faint it was almost earth-sky blue, laced with a never-fading tapestry of entwined auroras in a mix of blue, purple, gray, white, and silver hues. That thing, that tapestry, either killed this world, or it pulled what was left out of the ashes. You're sure you want this one? Hens didn't ask, just restated. Not really. But I figure if I ever come back, I'd like to do it helping breathe life into a place that didn't get much of a chance in the first place. Clyde's eyes roamed across the desert before fixating on the sky. I'll do it. I'll finish the list. Hens had to take a second to breathe and work the tension out of his body. He couldn't get his heart to slow down, but it didn't matter. I just wish we could have done it together. He fiddled with that little metal stick. He wondered what happened to all the people who didn't have these. And he wondered if, far off in the future, where Clyde would end up. Where he would too, when everything went black. Like I said earlier, I saw a lot. I could have died alone, in some sad, lonely colony or apartment or wherever else. I'm glad I got to choose, and to spend a lot of that time choosing to be, with you and everyone else I picked up along the way. Clyde raised an eyebrow at Hens. You recording? Yeah. Good. I wanna... Shit. Can't think of anything else profound. Do you think things would be different if we hadn't taken that one trip? Of course they would have. But someone has to wander so everyone else knows where to go and not to go, right? Clyde looked up again. Night, or at least this world's answer today, was starting to fall. The shade of purple took on a darker color, becoming thick and opaque before it started to unveil a carpet of black void and shining stars. Distant worlds. Distant lives. I'll send you copies of my journal. The pictures, too. If you find out the dead can reply, let me know. I'll try. Those were Clyde's last words. He either couldn't think of anything to follow up with, or decided it wasn't worth saying. Maybe he was too lost in his own thoughts. The sky became twilit and full, that pale blue star disappearing into the flat tops of the mountains. There was a faint beep. Hens didn't look at Clyde, at least not anywhere but his face. The older man had tears in his eyes, but he was smiling. That little time capsule that Hens had almost forgot he was holding lit up. It was brighter than Hens had expected, a rainbow of colors in varying intensities, all of them their own shade of brightness. The closest mankind ever got to immortality was another question. When some people who died in the wrong places and at the wrong times simply never got to ask. Hens wondered what happened to those people, if their gods took them in the end regardless, or if they were content to just fade away. Someone would find out eventually. Hens had one last thought as he built up the willpower to open that small device, letting loose Clyde's essence and watching it swirl up into the clouds just as the sand had. That thought mixed with some strange sense of wonder pressing on his mind, somehow turning into words of its own, the aurora reaching out and gently brushing its invisible hands against him. They were thinking, feeling, the same thing. I want to be somewhere I can call home. Maybe I can help others do that too. No matter how deep into the universe humanity goes, they find a lot more questions than answers. Some of the oldest ones only evolve as they're exposed to new factors. At the end of the day, the most basic fact remains the same: the drive to figure out what the world is pushing you so hard to see. Mankind's curiosity can't be sated, so the need to keep wandering persists. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.